Going live. All righty. This is not ESPN's 30 for 30. This is my 98 for 98. The 98 seasons in the history of the New York Football Giants in 98 days. Now, I'm probably not going to get all 98 seasons done in 98 days, but I'm trying to get them done before the beginning of the season starts, which is like around September, and I should be able to get them all done by then. But we're just chugging along. We are rolling along here. We're up to the 1936 NFL season, which just happened to be the 12th season in the history of the New York Football Giants. Now, the Giants in the NFL and the NFL, the existence of the NFL is 5 years apart. The NFL started in 1920. Giants started in 1925. So if it's the 12th season in the history of the New York Giants, it's the 17th season in the history of the NFL. It was not a banner season for the Giants, although they had a chance to go to the championship game. They had a chance, a little more on that in a bit, but it was also it was a very good season. Had a couple constants for the first time ever. I'll go over that in a little bit. But one of the most exciting things that happened in the 1936 season was in something that we froth at the mouth for every April nowadays. It was the first NFL draft, 1936. The first NFL draft. 1936 National Football League draft. It was the first draft ever. It took place on February 8th, 1936 at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So there you go. There's your Trivial Pursuit question. The Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The draft was instituted in an effort to end bidding wars among the league's teams by arbitrary assignment of negotiating rights to amateur players. It was haphazardly decided that the last place team from the previous season would get, and they should, the first selection. And the process would continue in reverse order of standings. Under this structure, the Philadelphia Eagles, who finished 1935 at 2-9, would select first. That makes sense. The thing I don't quite understand, and they don't seem to explain that here, is that the team, the Detroit Lions, won the 1935 championship. The Giants lost the championship. What I don't understand, hopefully someday I'll find this out or figure it out or whatever, why the Giants selected last in the first round. I mean, the way it is nowadays, right? The Kansas City Chiefs beat the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl. So, therefore, in the draft, the Kansas City Chiefs select last, 32. The Eagles select 31. So you would figure that in 1935, the Detroit Lions beat the New York Giants in the championship game 26-7. You'd figure since the Lions won the championship in 1935, they would select last in the 36th draft. It didn't happen that way. The Giants selected last, and the Lions selected 8th. Actually, there was only 9 teams. Now, another one of the constants, and I'm going to go over another one in a few minutes here, was that bringing up 9 teams. This was the first season ever where there were back-to-back, since the Giants were in existence, since 1925, where there were back-to-back seasons with the same teams, same amount of teams, no teams folded, no teams came in, nothing. The first year for the Giants was in 1925. There was 20 teams. 1926, there was 22 teams. 1927, there was 12 teams. 1928, there was 10 teams. 1929, there was 12 teams. 1930, there was 11 teams. 1931, there was 10 teams. 1932 was down to 8 teams. 1932 and 1943 were the fewest teams that the NFL ever had, which was 8. Okay, so I said 1932, there was 8 teams. 1933, it jumped back up to 10 teams. 1934, actually, there were 10 teams. However, the Cincinnati Reds, not the baseball team, the Cincinnati Reds, the football team, there were 10 teams. The Cincinnati Reds were one of them. They lost their first 8 games, and then they were kicked out of the league for not paying their dues, their league dues. I guess they were in those 8 games. The Cincinnati Reds, in 1934, scored a grand total of 10 points in 8 games. They were bad. So I possibly the reason why they did not pay their league dues, maybe they just didn't have the money. They had to pay their players, and they just didn't have. I'm not exactly sure, but they did not pay their league dues. They were kicked out of the league after only playing 8 games. The St. Louis Gunners, an independent team, finished out the Cincinnati Reds schedule. They played the Gunners played 3 games in the absence of the Cincinnati Reds, and actually the Gunners, they were 1-2, so they actually won a game. So with the fact that there were 10 teams, but actually since the Cincinnati Reds got kicked out and the St. Louis Gunners came in and took their place for the final 3 games, actually there was a grand total of 11 teams in the league in 1934. So 1935 and 1936, there was 9 teams. The Western Division, right, had 4 teams, and the Eastern Division had 5. So that was one constant. That was the first time that since the Giants were playing in 1925, there were back-to-back seasons with the same exact teams, same exact number of teams. No teams came in, no teams folded. So that just goes to show you how crazy it was back then. Now, this was also kind of funny too. And also the NFL draft here. Okay, this draft was the only draft to have 9 rounds. The number increased to 10 in 1937. The first player ever drafted was Jay Berwanger. Actually, and he was a Heisman Trophy winner as well. Jay Berwanger, who had previously been awarded the first ever Heisman Trophy, but he never played in the NFL because the Philadelphia Eagles selected him. But but his rights were traded by the Philadelphia Eagles to the Chicago Bears, as the Eagles felt that they would not be able to meet Berwanger's reported demand of $1,000 per game. Now, that's crazy. That's a lot of money back then. The Eagles received tackle Art Buss from the Bears in exchange for Berwanger's rights. However, all right, George Halas was unable to convince Berwanger to sign with the Bears. I guess I'm not sure if it was the money or what. I don't know. But so Berwanger got a job in rubber sales. So Berwanger was the first one, I guess, ever drafted, but he never played in the NFL. So therefore, Riley Smith, the second pick, was the first player ever be drafted that actually played in the NFL. Riley Smith of the Boston Redskins. He was a quarterback from Alabama. There you go. The first player ever drafted to play in the NFL was Riley Smith, a quarterback from Alabama. Now, the kicker of that, okay, the Boston Redskins, this was 1936, the Boston Redskins selected a quarterback, 1936. Well, the following season, because of poor ticket sales, for whatever reason, they just could not get people to watch their football team in Fenway Park in Boston. So the following season, Preston Marshall, their owner, moved them to Washington, D.C., where they became the Washington Redskins. But the funny thing is that they selected a quarterback in 1936 with their first pick. Well, in 1937, they selected a quarterback, Sammy Baugh, Hall of Fame quarterback. So they picked back-to-back quarterbacks. I'm not ever sure what actually ever happened to Riley Smith, but I can tell you Sammy Baugh played from 1937 to 1952, and he worked his way into the Hall of Fame as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Now, also that was to be a problem for the Giants as well, okay, because the championship game started in 1933. From 1933 to 1946, those 14 seasons, only the Giants and the Redskins went to the championship games. Now, there were quite a couple times where the Giants would have made the championship game had it not been for Sammy Baugh. Sammy Baugh, slinging Sammy Baugh, right? He could throw a football. He helped beat the Giants on multiple occasions and prevented them from going to championship games. So, but it just goes to show you how how dominant it was from 1933 to 1946. Also, the same thing in the Western Division as well, too. From 1933, when the championship games first started, to 1946, only 3 teams went to the championship game in the Western Division. The Lions went one time. The other 13 times, the Bears and the Packers went. Wasn't until 1947 that the Chicago Cardinals went and the Philadelphia Eagles went. The Chicago Cardinals, they won 28-21. They beat the Eagles 28-21 in the 1947 championship game. That was the only championship that the Chicago Cardinals won, 1947. So it's been a long time for the Chicago Cardinals. Then on top of that, the Detroit Lions, the last time they won the championship was 1957. Jim Brown's rookie season. So the Chicago the Cardinals, Arizona, Phoenix, St. Louis Cardinals, whatever you want to call them. It's been a long time. 1947, a long time. It's like over 75 years. But also the same, the Detroit Lions, been since 1957 that they won a championship. So it's been a long time coming for the Detroit Lions as well. But the Giants, okay, didn't do too well in their first round selection, okay. However, their second round pick wound up being a Hall of Famer. Now, what do we got? 1, 2, I think there was 3 Hall of Famers selected in. Oh, 4, maybe 4. 4 Hall of Famers were selected in this 1936 NFL draft. One of them was from the Giants. Tuffy Lemons, who actually led the NFL in rushing yards in 1936. So he was a very good player for the Giants. Tuffy Lemons. He was a fullback / running back, whatever you want to call him, from George Washington. He was taken with the 18th pick overall in the second round. So he was taken. Tuffy Lemons was taken by the Giants in the last pick of the second round, which was number 18 overall. But the Giants took Art Pappy Lewis, a tackle from Ohio. That was the Giants' first ever draft pick. Pappy Lewis. There you go. There's your Trivial Pursuit question. Who was the first draft pick the Giants ever took? First round, pick number 9, the final selection in the first round, Art Pappy Lewis, a tackle from Ohio. So there you go. So the Giants picked at 9 picks. They said the second round they took Tuffy Lemons, who wound up being a Hall of Famer. Third round they took Frank Lobes, an end from Purdue. Then they took Gene Rose, an end from Tennessee. Then they took Edward Jontos, a guard from Syracuse. Then Gus Durner, a tackle from Duke. Then they took Bob Peoples, a tackle from Marquette, the powerhouse Marquette. They had 2 more picks here. They took Dale Heekin, a back from Ohio State. And then their final pick in the 1936 NFL draft was Phil Flanagan, an offensive guard from Holy Cross. So those are those nine guys. There was 4 Hall of Famers were taken in this draft. Dan Fortman was a guard from Colgate, taken by the Chicago Bears. He was taken in the 9th round. Joe Stidahar, a tackle from West Virginia, was taken in the 1st round by the Bears. So the Bears wound up with 2 Hall of Famers out of this. Wayne Milner, an end from Notre Dame, was taken in the 8th round by the Boston Redskins, and Alphonse Tuffy Lemons, a back from George Washington University, taken in the 2nd round, 18th overall by the New York Giants. He was inducted into the Professional Football Hall of Fame class of 1978. So there you go. So the first NFL draft ever. All right, so the 1936 NFL season was the 17th regular season in the history of the National Football League. It says for the first time since the league was founded, there were no team transactions. Neither teams folded, nor did a new one join the NFL for the first time. And all the league teams played the same number of games for the first time ever. Now the games, flux. 1936, they all played 12 games. From 1937 to 1942, they played 11 games. 1943 to 1945, they played 10 games. 1946, they went back down to 11 games. 1947 to 1960, they played 12 games. 1961 to 61 to 77, they played 14 games. 78 to 2020, they played 16 games. And then since 2021, they all played 17 games. So 1936 was also the 3rd season of the NFL's 12-year ban, which is absolutely freaking believable. It just goes to show you where some people's minds were back then. 1936 was also the 3rd season of the NFL's 12-year ban on black players. What an absolute freaking joke. The season ended with the Green Bay Packers defeating the Boston Redskins in the NFL championship game at the Polo Grounds. Now, I'm going to go a little bit more over that in a bit, because the Boston Redskins were eligible to host the championship game, but it was played in New York. I'll go over that in a little bit. This is also the only time in NFL history that a team declined home field advantage in the championship game and elected to play at a neutral site. While the Eastern Division champion Redskins were the home team, franchise owner George Preston Marshall, the Packers and the league mutually agreed to move the game from Fenway Park to the Polo Grounds in New York City due to low ticket sales. Obviously, you got yourself a championship game. You want a lot of people there. A lot of people there, more tickets, the more money you make. And that's the reason why he moved them from Boston to Washington, D.C. So they wind up in Washington, D.C. They wind up with much better attendance in Washington, D.C. For whatever reason, they could not get good attendance in Boston. So not only did they move the team in 1937 to Washington, but he declined home field advantage, and they wound up losing the game anyway. They probably would have lost anyway. Green Bay was a really good team in 1936, so they quite possibly, even if they played in Boston. But it just goes to show you that the money was so important back then to make whatever you could. He declined home field advantage to move it to New York. So they wind up with some with decent attendance there. Major rule changes. A draft shall be held to assign all new players entering the league for the first time to teams in an arbitrary and equitable manner. The penalty for an illegal forward pass that is thrown beyond the line of scrimmage is 5 yards from the spot of the foul. So nothing too major there, but we have division races. So the Giants wasn't a very good year for the Giants. Yeah, defensively, I mean, they were outscored. Was it by 48 points? They scored 115 points. They gave up 163. But believe it or not, to the final week of the season, just goes to show you how weak their division was. At the final week of the season, they still had a chance of going to the championship game. You got the division races here. In the Western Division, the Bears were 6-0 and the Packers were 5-1 midway through the 12-game season. Halfway through the season, they were basically a game apart, with the Packers' only loss having been a 30-3 blowout against Chicago. On November 1st, Green Bay beat the Bears 21-10 to give both teams a 6-1 record. Both teams continued to win, and both were 9-1 as Thanksgiving approached. The Bears lost their last two games, while Green Bay won both, thus putting the Packers into the championship game. Aha. I mean, the Bears were a very, very good team. Very, very, very. I mean, the Bears were from 1932 to 1946. The Bears were pretty much a powerhouse almost every season. In the Eastern Division, the Pittsburgh Pirates were at 6-5 and the Boston Redskins at 5-5 when they met on November 29th in Boston before a crowd of only 7,000 people. The Pirates lost 30-0, leaving them, leaving 6-5 Boston and 5-5 New York Giants as the remaining contenders. Because once the Pirates lost, they were 6-6. So Boston and New York finished the season by playing each other on December 6th, with the Redskins winning 14-0 in front of 18,000 spectators at the Polo Grounds. I'm going to go over this game a little bit. The Eastern winner had the right to host the 1936 NFL game. Now, the Eastern Division would host the even-numbered years. That the Giants hosted the 1934, the 1938, the 1944, the 1946, the 1956, the 1958, and the 1962 championship games. The Western Division hosted the championship games, the odd-numbered years. That's why the Giants were the road teams in the 1933, 1939, 1941, 1959, 1961, 1963, and I know, so was it 33? Oh, I'm sorry, 33, 35, 39, 41, 59, 61, 63 championship games. So the Giants were at home for 7 championship games. They were on the road for 7 championship games. Unfortunately, so they played, and Giants played from this prior to the Super Bowl era, from 1933 to 1965, the pre-Super Bowl era. The Giants played in 14 championship games. Unfortunately, there were only 3-11 in those championship games. Actually, at one time, they were actually 2-2 in the championship games. They were 1-9 in their final 10 championship games. They went 1-9 in their final 10 championship games. So it was after 1938, the Giants were 1-9 in championship games. So it was not very, very good. Let's see. The Eastern winner had the right to host the 1936 game, but due to low attendance in Boston, the Redskins owner, George Preston Marshall, and the Packers and the league mutually agreed to move the championship game to New York, where 29,545 people turned out. Marshall would subsequently move the Redskins to Washington the final season. He just, you can't, that was so huge back then. To actually get people in there and attend. I mean, it's not the way that, like, nowadays, most games are sold out, but even if it's not totally sold out, you get TV revenue, right? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how they break down, but selling a hot dog at a game for $500 and, a bottle of water is $3,000. It's all, you sell programs and all this stuff. That's all money, right? So, but so back then it was huge for attendance, and sometimes, back then, college football, baseball, and boxing were huge. Professional football really hadn't taken off yet, so that's why he declined home field advantage. Oh boy. The 1936 NFL championship game was the fourth championship game played in the National Football League. The Giants were in the first three. The Giants were in the 1933, 34, and 35 championship games. So this is 1936. It was the fourth championship game. It took place on December 13 at the Polo Grounds in New York City, making it the first NFL title game held on a neutral field. The Eastern Division champion Boston Redskins, who were 7-5, were the home team, but their owner, once again, as you said, and the Packers and the league mutually agreed to move the game from Fenway Park to the Polo Grounds due to low ticket sales. I mean, it was also a benefit to the Packers as well, too, because now it was on a neutral field, so they weren't playing in front of the Boston's home fans, but also they were going to make more money because there was going to be more people showed up. So it was a win-win for everybody. Even if you lost, you still won, because back then, I mean, they wanted to win the championship game, but back then, money, is huge. Several days after the game, Marshall announced he would move the team to his hometown of Washington, D.C. for the following season. This was the first championship game for both the Redskins and the Green Bay Packers. The Packers were favored. The Packers won 21-6 for their fourth NFL title, all under longtime head coach Curly Lambeau, having previously won the league championship awarded in 1929, 30, and 31. So that back then, 29, 30, and 31, the NFL championship game was awarded to the team who had the best winning percentage. So, and actually, and the Green Bay Packers were the first team to three-peat. And the Green Bay Packers were also the second team to three-peat. The Packers did it in 65, 66, 67, but the first time they ever did it was 29, 30, and 31. The Green Bay Packers, I believe it was like in the first 3 minutes of the game, the championship game, Don Hudson took a 48-yard pass from Arnie Herber for a touchdown to put them up 3-0. The Redskins struck back in the second quarter. They scored on a 2-yard run. The kick extra point failed, so it was 7-6 at halftime. So still reasonably, and it was anybody's game. But then in the third quarter, the Packers scored a touchdown on a pass. Then they scored on a run. Bob Monette scored on a 2-yard run, and to put the Packers up. But now the one thing is that once the Green Bay Packers scored their touchdown in the third quarter to go up 14-6. Now let's not forget, back in 1936, an 8-point lead was 2 scores, not like the way it is today, where it's just 1. So, if you're really struggling to, I mean, this is the way it was back then. If you're struggling to score, and you're struggling, it's not like, a lot of times there's not like lady momentum like how it is nowadays. I mean, you maybe all of a sudden you get a drive going and the momentum, the crowd starts going crazy and you get momentum and all of a sudden you maybe just start scoring a bunch of times. That's not the way it was back then. If you stunk and you had a hard time scoring, you stunk and you had a hard time scoring. So that's the way it was for the Redskins. But I mean, once the Green Bay Packers went up by 8 points in the third quarter, that's 2 scores. Things weren't looking too good for the Redskins. And once the Packers scored again, another touchdown in the fourth quarter, that put them up by 3 scores. So the game was pretty much over with by them. But, it was a very, very interesting season. But as I say, with the Giants, it just was not a good year for them. 36-37, they were not. 38-39, from 38, 39, 41, 44, and 46, they go to the championship games. 1943, they would wind up tied with the Redskins, and they had a playoff game to see who went to the championship game. So the Giants had a couple down seasons, but just to go to show you, I mean, once again, the Giants started their season off on the road because they were sharing the Polo Grounds with the New York baseball Giants. So the Giants every year since 1925 always started at least their first 2 or 3 games, and most of the time 4 games were on the road. Well, this was no different. They started off in Philadelphia. They played the first game on the road on September 13th in Philadelphia. They lost 10-7. Then they played the Pittsburgh Pirates on the road on September 27th. They lost that 10-7. So after 2 games, they're 0-2. They finally got on they finally won on the road. They played the Boston Redskins. They beat them 7-0. So now they're 1-2. The 4th week of the season, on Sunday, October 11th, they finally played their first home game. They played the Brooklyn Dodgers. They tied them 10-10. So after 4 games, the Giants were 1-2-1. The Giants beat the Chicago Cardinals at home on October 18th. They beat them 14-6. Then the following week at home on October 25th, they played the Philadelphia Eagles, and they beat them 21-17. Now the Giants are 3-2-1. The Giants played another game at home against on November 1st. They played against the Detroit Lions. They beat them 14-7. They always they always had a hard time with the Lions. So for them to beat them was something. But 2 games later, the Lions got their revenge. On Sunday, November 8th, the Chicago Bears came to town. The Chicago Bears won 25-7. So now the Giants are 4-3-1. The following week, the Giants went to Detroit, played the Lions in Detroit. They lost 38-0. Now the Giants are 4-4-1. The Green Bay Packers came to town on November 22nd. And the Green Bay Packers were very good. They only lost 1 game all year. The Green Bay Packers won 26-14. Then on Thanksgiving, so the Giants once again played on Sunday, November 22nd. Then they played 4 days later on Thanksgiving once again. The Giants always played on Thanksgiving back then. Once again, they always played on the road. And once again, they always played a team from New York. Once again, they played the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field, where the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team plays. So the Giants played Brooklyn Dodgers on Thanksgiving, November 26th. They won 14-0. Now they stood at 5-5-1. They were 5-5-1, and the Boston Redskins came into town. The Boston Redskins were 6-5. 6-5. Giants were 5-5-1. So there was 1 game left. It was played at the Polo Grounds, December 6th. If the Giants would have won that game, the Giants would have been 6-5-1. And the Boston Redskins would have been 6-6. Therefore, giving the Giants the championship. Just was not meant to be. So, once again, the Giants could, as bad as they were, I mean, they gave up a lot of points. I mean, as I said, they gave up 163 points, which was a lot. They only scored 115 points. They didn't even average 10 points a game. I mean, it was a bad season for the Giants. They lost 14-0. It was 7-0 go at halftime. In the second quarter, Don Irwin had scored on a 1-yard run to put it up 7-0. So it was 7-0 at halftime. The Giants actually outgained in the final game of the season. They actually outgained the Boston Redskins. They had 10 first downs. Boston only had 6 first downs. The Giants had 135 yards rushing. Boston only had 63 yards rushing. The Giants had 149 yards of total offense. So you think offense is bad nowadays. Whew. The Boston Redskins only had 126 yards of offense. The Giants had 3 turnovers in that game. Boston had 2. So, but what kind of put the final nail in the coffin, pretty much for the Giants, was in the third quarter they punted. Cliff Battles returned a punt 74 yards back for a touchdown to put Boston up 14-0. The Giants didn't score at all, and so therefore they they didn't make it to the championship game. But they did have a chance, even as bad as they were. They were 5-5-1 after 11 games going into the final game of the season. And at home, if they were able at home, they were able to beat the Redskins at home. They beat the Redskins on the road earlier in the season. So if you figure the Redskins come into town, the Giants, it's all on the line. If you win, you're in the championship game, right? It was not meant to be. That was not a banner season for the Giants. So 1936 and 1937, the Giants wouldn't go to the championship game. The Boston Redskins and the 1937 Washington Redskins, they went to the championship game. So, but as I said, after 36 and 37, there were much better times ahead for the Giants. The Giants, 1938 would win their third NFL championship. So there were better times ahead. The Giants, it is what it is, but they did have a chance. All right, guys. Well, that wraps up the 1936 season for the New York Football Giants. We'll be back again tomorrow with the 1937 NFL season and the 1937 season for the New York Football Giants, which just happened to be the 13th season in the history of the New York Football Giants. I'll see you then.